2020, and we're here at Lincoln Davis's Outboard Motor Museum and Collection. And today we're going to talk about outboard features and accessories. The features are more going to be, we're going to talk about the features that are, let's say, not essential to the operation of the outboard.
And some of them are absolutely useless.
Right. So we're gonna go into that area, and certainly, thinking about the history of the outboards and how they started with, of course, the great watermen, pioneering effort. There were no features on here that were useless, let's say. There were no accessories. Everything about this outboard was necessary for its operation. And in Ole Evinrude's effort with the, let's say, 1909, 1910 Evinrude detachable rowboat motor, that was a very simple device that had nothing extra that it...
Did he have a rudder on that, or was that a steerable?
Later they offered an accessory rudder.
Okay. Right.
So, but as the industry grew, I think marketing and sales kind of influenced some of the designs.
Oh, goody.
So we started ending up with features that maybe looked good and sounded good, but in true operation were pretty useless. And one of the things, something kind of early in the game, was after Ole left his Evinrude company and went on his long holiday with Bess. The Evinrude company started developing new ideas, different things, and I'm going to show over on this one your example. Plus, it would be very similar to the 1915 Evinrude.
That's the 1920s.
Yeah,
okay, yeah, all right, but it's the same as the
something. I think
yeah.
This is
okay.
Like a 24, probably 23. 24.
I shut you off for a minute there. That's why I had you repeat that. Okay.
So.
So this is very similar right here to the 1909 Evinrude in some ways, but there are some things on here that are not like it.
Yeah, so the Evinrude company, after Ole left, I think started coming up with different ideas that were implemented, and one of them was this reversing lower unit.
Okay, this one does reverse now. I checked that out, by the way.
So it with the twist of a handle, and it's kind of an idea that somebody had. It would be really nice to be able to hit reverse easily and back up. A lot of the rowboat motors didn't have any of this complication. They just, being a two-stroke, they ran in reverse.
Okay.
And but this, the complication with the reversing lower unit is, what do you do about this?
Right.
If the water pump is on the lower unit and the hose is hooked to the pump and you go reverse, it winds the hose up.
So what they did was they made this plate here,
Right.
which goes up and down regardless. It works off the...
And the pump, yes, there you go.
Right, there you go. And it works regardless. Let's see if we can swing this around. I'm just going to turn it off. It is in reverse.
Yeah, so now it's in reverse.
And we still got the pump working.
Yeah, the pump still works.
Going on, yeah.
And,
Yeah. But the transition from forward to reverse and then back to forward again isn't so great.
right, the boat actually moves sideways.
Sideways, right.
And as we'll see later with the N, the boat could run sideways forever.
Well, that depended on whether you knew how to run the engine or not, but yes.
So now we're at this, and it's somewhat a feature that one could argue is totally useless. It's a novelty today to run a rowboat motor and to actually have that reverse.
How about
work.
This?
Is a
You're
novelty.
at a boat show and you're a salesman.
Yeah.
Look at this.
Right.
You go, wow, that's cool. I
Right.
mean, I gotta have that. And
Right.
then they get it on their boat, and guess what?
The salesman would say, look, these other motors like this Wisconsin over here, you have to time it just right, hit the stop button and try to reverse it by reversing the engine, which is much too complicated. Keycafer later solved that whole problem with the direct reverse, sixes, which
Yeah, which
But
that has its
so
own
the salesman would have
disaster.
said, look, just grab the handle and twist it, and you have reverse just like that. You don't have to fool with the engine and it made sense a little bit.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and I think also part of this whole thing.
Do you suppose salesmen back then had shiny suits and spoke as much with a forked tongue as they do today?
Probably more. Right. They didn't have to worry about being sued. Right. So anyway, right around this same time, well, let's say 1915, Kale kind of got the same kind of marketing influence, and Kale rowboat motor, single cylinder like the Wisconsins with the Evinrude. They came up with a reversible propeller, variable pitch propeller, and it was really quite the nice. And we have one over here.
And I got to say, it works.
Sure. Here we go. You see, and this is a slightly later one, not quite exactly like the rowboat motor, but close.
Close. Worked the same way with a lever.
And that's what Kale offered in 1915, right through their whole.
Right up to 34. That's what that one is right
end.
there. That's the end of the line right there. You can see the lower unit in that one.
Right.
You can see it moving.
Yeah. So the question becomes, if it was so great, why didn't other outboard makers do that?
Too complicated.
Well, yeah, I mean,
And if you hit a rock,
this couldn't have cost much money to make.
yeah,
Compared
right,
to a regular
exactly.
calf propeller, right? I mean, this is really simple. Well, it's got this piece that rotates. It's got the blades that
They wear out, and the blades flop and
Right.
don't work quite right, and then you hit a rock, and you've
all
got a
done
very
anyway, right,
expensive replacement.
Right. So the other thing that Kale did, though, was and I think it was 1915, and 15 or 17 in that range, they came up with a very clever rewind starter, and it mounted on top. It was anchored to the gas tank, and there was a handle that you'd pull.
Now, Bill, here we have the last of the Kales. We have a little bit earlier one, but still in the 30s.
Right.
Over there, we have a Kale 5-speed.
Yeah.
We have a Kale 30 Racer.
Right.
None of those had the recoil. So what happened? Because it became the standard feature in the 50s. You had to have an automatic rewind.
Kale made a lot of outboards with that feature,
Okay.
and they all disappeared. I don't know if they failed, if they broke. They probably broke.
They probably broke and didn't work that well.
Right,
That would
yeah.
be my guess. They hadn't worked out a few things about it.
Because I've seen a lot of Kale rowboat motors that used to have that feature, and you can tell because there's a riveted on standoff on the top of the gas tank where
Gotcha.
that would have fastened to,
Gotcha.
like an
Okay.
anti-rotation.
So your guess is that they just didn't work well.
just probably didn't
okay.
work well.
Okay. They hadn't worked
But they
out how to-
advertised them for many years.
Yeah.
It wasn't just like 1 year and it had disappear. They kept right on going, right? Well into the 20s.
Right.
And that was on their, what they would call like their premium rowboat motor.
Gotcha.
It had the variable pitch propeller and the rewind starter. They also sold the Kale Neptune rowboat motor that was very simple.
Okay.
It had a non-reversing regular propeller and a knob
They
start
they
flight.
still do that same kind of thing today. I mean, like Mercury offers their V6 in 3 different configurations, which have different price ranges and different uses, like commercial versus high speed versus whatever. They have the Verado cradle system versus the straight swivel tube versus, and that's the same kind of thing.
Let's just confuse the consumer.
Well, yes, I agree with you. Let's confuse the mechanics too. I have to go to school, and I absolutely found that the most confusing things. And guess what? We're mechanics. We went to school. Guess what they tested us on? The different models.
Yeah. So you could identify.
So who do you think wrote the test? Was it salespeople? Yes, I think it was.
Right. Huh. Anyway, so as we move out of the teens and into the 20s, Alto comes back, and Ole Evernude comes back into the outboard business with the Alto, Evernude Light Twin Outboard. And one feature that he added to that outboard that was basically unheard of in the industry was underwater exhaust. That the Alto Light Twin, or Rudder Twin as it's called, came right through in 1921 with underwater exhaust.
Should we go over and take a look at it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're including this today.
So that's basically through hub exhaust.
It's through hub exhaust.
Prop
that's
exhaust
right.
that we don't see until we see mercury.
Right. So Alto came out right off with a feature that wasn't essential for the operation of the outboard, but it made a nice touch. It made a very quiet running outboard that had underwater exhaust.
Which we don't see again until the late 50s.
Right. So then, right after this, though, the horsepower race starts. Okay. And Roaring 20s horsepower race, and all people cared about was just being able to go fast. To buy an outboard motor, put it on a boat, and plane off and go fast. But the exception to that is the little Johnson Light Twin. This being a slightly later version, but
Same power.
when these were introduced in late 21, early 22, they had above water exhaust. So even though Ole had his Alto with underwater exhaust, the Johnson engineering, the thought was make it as light as possible and as simple as possible. And that was worth a lot in those days, having it a very light outboard that didn't need a battery. They perfected the magneto. And we've talked about this whole
Yes.
Johnson business before. So now we're going through the 20s, and this is when accessories and absurdities really took off. It was there was a buying public out there that had some money in the 20s to spend on stuff, and we're going to cover the I think the champion of all this is the Evernude N. Model N.
Okay, I'll splice in at this point.
Yeah, and the Evernude N, started in 23, I think, and went right through. They actually resurrected the N even in the early 30s and built and sold some with leftover parts on the shelf. Okay, Model N Sport Twin, and this really fits in to the subject that we've been talking about today about accessories and features that are really unnecessary for the running of a good outboard motor. And this engine really wins because it has the most features that one could argue are unnecessary. And one of the features that we can look at right away is the lock, the built-in lock. We talked about a little earlier in a previous part of the video that we showed some outboards that were able to use a padlock. In this case, Evernude
Slot down into the slot on the thumb screw.
Right.
Put some.
Yeah. So Evernude decided that it'd be much better just to put the lock built in so you wouldn't lose a padlock, which you'd be able to use on many other things. But and then the other one of the other exciting features in this engine is the light, and this light is missing its little hood. It usually
It had a little hood on it.
Yeah, it has a little hood on it.
Okay, all right.
And you can get one. I think it's Model A4. It has the same little hood. And it has that feature, and it also has, it's covered before, but we'll show it again, is the reversible low unit. So this one reverses without turning the power head around. Similar in design to the earlier Evernude. So the other feature that this had that goes back to automotive, and I've seen Evernude Model N advertisements in the mid-20s talking about starts like your Ford car. And people that had Model T Fords, of course, they had the first flywheel magneto. And the intent on the early Fords was for the car to be able to start just on the magneto, just by putting the crank in the front of the engine and cranking it over. And that worked, but very soon after, it became clear that if you used a battery to start the Model T Ford, it was much easier. And so the Ford had a selector switch that had a two-position switch, so you could start it on battery and switch it to mag. So the Evinrude, advertising a claim that starts like your Ford car, has a hookup for a battery. It's certainly not as easy as the selector switch on a Ford, but nevertheless the provision is there and it works. The other provision that they added was a place for a light jack. You could actually plug in an accessory
Light. Instead of having it here, you could have an accessory light very similar to this one right here.
Right, yeah. So anyway.
Which we don't have the jack for, but we can test it in this socket.
So this demonstration, we're actually going to start this thing on battery. And Lincoln will plug it right in.
This is not a standard jack size. It's a 1/4 inch, and they use them on switchboards.
Yeah.
This side over here is the standard audio jack.
So he's going to start it on battery to show that it will actually run on battery, and we're going to plug it.
You watch the light right here. It gets a little bit brighter when you turn it off. Now, the bulb out, we're going to push this in, but I think the continuity's gone in it. But this would have been a remote light that instead of this, they would have used a standard audio jack and plugged it in on this side. That's how this works.